As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a Jedi. This video is the story of my relationship with Star Wars from my childhood until the present. Star Wars was fated to be a huge part of my childhood. I was born within days of the release of The Phantom Menace, to a father who had been 7 when Star Wars came out in 1977. My childhood happened during prequel mania, so Star Wars-themed toys, merchandise, and games were a big part of my formative years. I remember being 6 years old when my dad started showing me the Star Wars movies in release order. Revenge of the Sith was the first PG-13 movie my parents allowed me to watch at 7. As a result, I fell in love with sci-fi and space operas. I remember playing pretend with my friends, imagining we were Jedi and Sith having lightsaber battles. Being a child, I didn't understand a lot of what was going on in Star Wars, mainly its political themes, but I viewed all 6 movies fondly. I remember my favorite movie being Revenge of the Sith, probably because it felt like the epic culmination of the series at the time. Video games were also a big part of my childhood. My dad bought an original Xbox, and I would periodically watch him play games on it, then take turns trying them, or play together if a game allowed. The first Star Wars game I ever played was 2001's Star Wars Obi-Wan, where you play as Obi-Wan during his training under Qui-Gon up through the events of The Phantom Menace. The climax of the game takes place during the Duel of the Fates. In particular, I remember the game's Battle Royale mode, where you face every Jedi in the game at once and try to survive. While not a Battle Royale mode by the modern definition, I had a lot of fun trying to win against all the Jedi as a kid. I also remember enjoying 2007's LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, which combined my love of both Legos, Star Wars, and video games into a single package. The Star Wars game that had the biggest influence on my childhood was 2005's Star Wars Battlefront 2. I enjoyed participating in the game's epic battles, playing split screen with my dad or friends. You would start by picking a team, Rebels or Empire for the original trilogy maps, and CIS or Republic for the prequel trilogy maps. Eventually, if you got enough kills, you could summon a Jedi or Sith from the faction you were playing as to destroy the enemy team. I played this game for years, as late as 2012, and it was the source of the username I used prior to my transition, which was created to be the Jedi version of my dead name. I even purchased the game on Steam and played it occasionally after our Xbox stopped working. By the early 2010s, prequel mania had largely calmed down, but Star Wars still maintained its status as a cultural juggernaut. Then in late 2012, when I was 13, George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney. Soon afterwards, the sequel trilogy was announced. Originally, Lucas had planned to make 9 films, telling the story of Anakin Skywalker and his children. However, after the poor critical reception to the prequel trilogy, he had scrapped plans to make this sequel trilogy. When Disney bought the franchise, they immediately wanted to capitalize upon it financially, so they greenlit a new sequel trilogy. My relationship with Star Wars grew and evolved as I became a teenager and developed an interest in filmmaking. I revisited the movies over the years and got a new sense for how much I liked each one from a technical and storytelling perspective. This led my enjoyment of a few of the movies to diminish a little bit, as I came to understand the craft on display, but I still loved the franchise and held it in great esteem. I also found a new appreciation for the political themes of the series, now understanding enough about politics to comprehend them. Before I get any comments, yes, Star Wars has always been political. Just because you were too young to understand the political themes, or largely agreed with them doesn't mean the series was not political. It's literally called Star Wars. Wars are inherently political because they arise from disagreements between political factions. The series has always had a leftist, anti-fascist, and anti-colonial bent to it. The Empire is inspired by colonial and imperialist powers, primarily Nazi Germany, but also, according to Lucas, the United States. He's been very public about the fact that the rebels are a stand-in for freedom fighters anywhere, the most salient example having been the Viet Cong when the first movie came out. The prequels are largely about the fall of democracy and rise of fascism, and Lucas has said that various characters are inspired by contemporary American politicians of the 90s and early 2000s. While not a perfect allegory by any means, Lucas's take feels prescient given the current direction of American politics. Granted, it was very easy to see where things were going if you were awake and paying attention, so it's not super impressive. When the teaser trailer for The Force Awakens released in late 2014, I was super excited. I love movie trailers. A truly great trailer makes use of tight editing, music, and clips from the movie to excite or intrigue the viewer, enough to get a sense for what the movie will be about without revealing too much. I tend to rewatch trailers I love repeatedly, and The Force Awakens was one of those trailers that just hit perfectly, leading me to watch it dozens of times before the movie released in December 2015. I was 16 at the time, so I remember waiting until I finished all my final exams for the semester, and then going to see Star Wars with my family when I was done with school for the holidays. The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie I saw in theaters, having been too young to watch the prequels when they were released. I felt very emotional and incredibly excited watching The Force Awakens for the first time. It felt true to the essence of what made Star Wars great, and was a huge source of nostalgia. On repeat viewings, I came to still enjoy the movie, but felt it played things a bit safe, retreading too much of the original movie rather than telling a new story. Still, I was very excited to watch subsequent Star Wars movies. However, The Last Jedi is when things started to change for me. I thought the movie was fine. Not my favorite Star Wars movie, but by no means the worst either. I had some issues with it, but thought it was a decent movie. The thing that really frustrated me was the discourse around The Last Jedi. I saw a lot of hot takes online where people believed that Rian Johnson had personally ruined their childhoods, and people would get very angry with you if you disagreed with them, so I felt very alienated from discussing the movie with other people, even some of my friends at the time. It made me disengage with talking about Star Wars with people, particularly online, which was a shame because I was still quite passionate about the series. In preparation for the release of the final film of the sequel trilogy, my family rewatched all of the Star Wars movies in chronological order, including Rogue One and Solo. Seeing the whole story unfold before my eyes was fun and allowed me to understand what I liked and disliked about each movie. Afterwards, we went to see The Rise of Skywalker in theaters. Seeing Rise of Skywalker was one of the worst experiences I've ever had watching a movie in theaters. Immediately from the start, I could tell that something was wrong. The beginning of the movie was paced way too fast. Scenes were abbreviated, lasting seconds, cut quickly to move the story along, but not in montage. It felt like nothing was given a chance to breathe, which had the effect of not allowing the audience time to digest and process information before moving on to the next scene. This had a disorienting effect on me that produced a feeling closely related to anxiety. I wasn't having a panic attack though, I just felt irritated and like the movie was moving way too fast for me, and I couldn't catch my breath. Had I been watching at home, I would have paused the movie to take a break. Roughly the first hour of Rise of Skywalker is paced like this, and crams so much exposition in that it makes the movie feel like it's trying to cover 2 movies worth of plot in a single one. The Rise of Skywalker almost seems embarrassed to be the sequel to The Last Jedi, and tries to undo some of that movie in its opening act, leading to a sense of dissonance, especially when it undermines aspects of the previous movie I enjoyed. It almost feels like it's trying to make both a second and third movie in the sequel trilogy at the same time, and goes about it in the most awkward and inelegant way possible. The fact that somehow Palpatine returned makes the movie feel cheap, especially because it doesn't show his return on screen, and instead says it happened in the opening crawl and addresses it in an early scene, with very little justification. I still can't get over the fact that his return was revealed in fucking Fortnite. Eventually, somewhere in the middle, the pacing slows down to a normal speed, but the damage has been done by the first act. It doesn't help that the movie makes some downright terrible story choices that I don't want to litigate plot point by plot point here, as others have done that more extensively than I care to. The result is what I consider the worst Star Wars movie ever made, and it's not even close. I could find redeeming qualities in previous movies that I didn't enjoy, like Attack of the Clones, but Rise of Skywalker is so disastrously bad that it kind of ruined Star Wars for me. Not in the rage-inducing way that toxic people reacted to The Last Jedi, just in a disappointing and depressing way that made me want to stop thinking about Star Wars. What was supposed to be the epic conclusion to a 9-film saga spanning 5 decades ends in the equivalent of a wet fart. If I was interested enough to watch it a couple more times, I could put together a more thorough analysis of the movie's flaws, but others have done that, and the big thing that watching Rise of Skywalker instilled in me was apathy. I felt bummed that Disney clearly had constructed the sequel trilogy with no overarching plans, and completely botched its conclusion by trying to course correct from The Last Jedi after the backlash, rather than staying committed to that movie's ideas. Trying to undo the previous movie in response to the backlash shows that Lucasfilm and Disney were captured by their audience. They were too afraid to let The Last Jedi stand because its audience didn't want to hear the ideas it had. At least it's a movie with coherent themes and ideas, unlike The Rise of Skywalker, which feels like a movie trying to please everybody, but in the end pleasing nobody as a result. This is a pretty powerful instance of how audience capture can destroy a story, as Rise of Skywalker undermines the message of multiple other Star Wars movies, most notably The Last Jedi and Return of the Jedi. It gave me the sense that Lucasfilm and Disney didn't care about telling a good story, and just wanted the billions in box office revenue that a new Star Wars trilogy would bring. I kinda stopped caring about Star Wars after this point. Star Wars wasn't completely absent from my life, as I watched The Mandalorian Season 1 and enjoyed it a lot, considering it the best piece of Star Wars media in years. But the second season happened and wasn't as good, feeling stretched thin plot-wise and ending with a climax that was a cool idea, but felt very weird to me because the strange deepfake Luke Skywalker landed in the uncanny valley. It also felt like the natural conclusion of Grogu and Mando's story. Afterwards, Disney released several more Star Wars shows, starting with the Book of Boba Fett. I tried to watch the first episode, but just couldn't get into it. I was bored and uninterested, so I never continued watching that show. I hoped that the upcoming Kenobi show would be better, but it wasn't. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan has always been a standout aspect of the original trilogy, but his show sucked, in spite of his compelling performance. It just wasn't written and directed well, and there were several terrible sequences like the baby Leia chase scene, or Obi-Wan's desperate battle against a gate he could have just jumped over or walked around. Beyond it all, Kenobi just felt cheap and poorly made. This was a huge disappointment because it was the Star Wars project I was most excited about, given that I loved Owen in the prequels. Seeing that Disney couldn't even get a slam dunk like Kenobi right, alongside the general lack of quality control in their MCU Disney Plus shows, put me off of Star Wars completely. I stopped caring or engaging with the shows. I never watched Season 3 of The Mandalorian because I knew that he and Grogu appeared in the Book of Boba Fett, so I would be missing that context if I didn't watch that show, which I really didn't want to. I paid no attention to Ahsoka or The Acolyte, because I had lost faith that Disney could tell a compelling Star Wars story without botching it. The one exception to this lack of interest in Star Wars projects is Andor. Initially, when it was announced, I cynically had the response that it was a show literally nobody asked for. Diego Luna was good in Rogue One as Cassian Andor, and I think that movie is generally my favorite of the Disney movies. But I didn't have any interest in a prequel series about his character and expected Andor to be more poorly made Disney Plus slop. However, I was extremely wrong. Shortly after the show finished airing, I heard that it was good. Like, really good. So I was intrigued, and oh my god, Andor was a revelation. My hot take is that Andor is the greatest piece of Star Wars media ever created, eclipsing my previous favorite, The Empire Strikes Back, which I still consider one of the greatest movies ever made. The reason Andor is so good is that it has very little reverence for Star Wars. Instead, it focuses on telling a good story without the fan service that's plagued the franchise since the prequels, and finally completely executes the political themes of anti-fascist resistance that have been present since 1977, but largely treated as set dressing in previous movies. Andor finally engages with the moral dilemmas of revolutionary struggle and violent resistance, and doesn't sugarcoat it. Its characters are not heroes. They just want to be liberated from tyranny. Andor just works because it treats the rebellion and empire seriously, taking them to their logical conclusion. The closest Star Wars had gotten to properly executing these ideas prior to Andor was in Revenge of the Sith, which is a movie about the fall of a republic and rise of fascism, told as an almost elemental tragedy. Lucas is trying to combine ideas from the fall of the Roman Republic, rise of Nazi Germany, and fall of a messianic figure to evil. The themes and symbolism are why I hold a fondness for Revenge of the Sith in spite of its many flaws, and consider it underrated. Andor Season 1 takes these themes constructed by Lucas and crystallizes them into a fantastic story about the radicalization of a rebel after dealing with a lifetime of tyranny and repression. It's Star Wars made competently and for adults. Andor is done so well that I have zero interest in future Star Wars stories that aren't made in this grittier and darker style. It truly feels like Star Wars but evolved and perfected into a prestige drama, and is one of my favorite shows of all time. Disney should put showrunner Tony Gilroy in charge of the franchise and give him a blank check to make more political thrillers set in the Star Wars universe. Currently, I have a pretty cynical view of Star Wars. I still have a fondness for the series born of a lifetime of engagement with it, but I won't get out of bed for the Star Wars IP anymore, unless there's a really interesting or novel take on it. I view the Disney era as a series of mistakes, caused by greed and incompetence, with a few bright spots. I think Star Wars needs bold new leadership. Otherwise, it should be allowed to rest and become an iconic thing of the past. This is why I roll my eyes at Star Wars crossovers or products. The Disney Corporation has exceeded my goodwill with many of its properties over the 2010s and 2020s. I'm just not interested in Marvel or Star Wars in the way that I used to be, unless it's critically acclaimed or something fresh. I also think that franchises should be allowed to die and fade into history when they've reached their natural conclusions. They shouldn't be kept alive like zombies, a shell of what was, shuffling along until everyone has given up on them. The best stories go out with a bang and leave everyone satisfied, and are comfortable fading into history, to be remembered fondly. However, capitalism is the true villain here, as the owners of valuable IPs will want to extract as much value as possible from them, until the brand is destroyed and nobody cares anymore. Let creativity and expression guide art, not being as widely palatable as possible to capture the largest market share. I want stories that exist because creatives have interesting ideas, rather than someone wanted quarterly profits to go up.